So I'm a entomologist with the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, and we have a small program of 4 people that cover the state an entomology and pathology program. Um, so I'll just go very quickly here. Got a lot to say and not a lot of time. So basically, as already been said, the males are small and flightless. Females are what we're almost always going to see. In our population here in California, I've measured a few hundred, and they're pretty much all 3.1 millimeters. And as mentioned before, they have mycangia, and this species has the mandibular kind. Um, there are 2 papers that provide couplets and keys. So the primary key is in Gomez 2018, North American Xylobrini. And then since this was discovered after the publication of that paper, additional couplets to get to Monographis are provided in Robaglia Smith et al. From 2020. The most if you're looking under a high-powered microscope, the most diagnostic character here on the West Coast is this displaced first striae, which would normally be quite close to the median suture between the 2 elytra, but because of these large tubercles, it gets displaced widely. There's one other species in North America. It's quite a bit bigger, 4 millimeters versus 3 millimeters on the East Coast, Xyloborus celsus. And when I'm just doing rough sorting, the main thing I look for under relatively lower power, when I can't really see the little spines and whatnot, are just the shape of the tip of the body here, the ends of the elytra. It's quite truncated, it's quite squared off, where pretty much every other similar species is at least somewhat pointed in that character. So that's a really quick and easy one. And this is another invasive, but it does not attack living trees, as far as I can tell. So we first collected this species. It was collected by arborists in Calistoga in 2017. The fungi at that point were at least partially identified, but it wasn't until 2019, in the fall of that year, that the beetles were identified by, I believe Sherry Smith from the Forest Service was the first person to identify it, but I'm not 100% positive. It might have been Bob Robaglia in Washington, also of the Forest Service. So the Department of Agriculture here did do a delimitation survey, starting with the what appears to be the epicenter in northern Napa Valley. Once they hit 3 counties, by statute, they pretty much stopped at that point and threw their hands up. A year or so later, we found it in eastern part of Sacramento County, and then now, as of 2024, it's we've delimited it quite a bit larger. And this isn't through trapping, it's just through visual surveys and reports. And we believe it's actually quite a bit further north into southern Mendocino. We have a suspicious tree there, but we haven't been able to get access to it on private property. There was some questions earlier. Temperature-wise, it can tolerate freezing. Even in Napa on Mount St. Helena, where I've found it at close to 2,000 feet, it snows up there. And I'll get into its distribution in Europe in a little bit, but basically 2,000 feet is the limit, and the highest population densities are below 1,500 feet in Europe, and in our very limited experience here in California, that seems to be holding here as well. The only thing I wanted to say about the life history, which got covered in the first talk, is that this step here, between the fall, when they kill the tree and the females are all mated and ready to go and attack new trees, they just sit in the wood while it's being chopped up for firewood, and they wait until the spring in general to really come out of that wood. So this is where a lot of the movement of this species takes place, is in, at least in California so far, it looks like a lot of it has been in firewood. And of course, limited distribution on the wing as well. So the primary host in California is the valley oak. And I added these sentences here because in general, like with Xylosandrus, they're finding that flood is bad, and we find that too, but it's primarily attacking valley oak, which is the most, I would think it's the most flood tolerant of all the California oaks. And it's also heat and drought tolerant. And I will address this a little more in some other slides. It's less common on blue oak, which is also a white oak section oak. And then even though we have quite a few trees we've been tracking in healthy forest of Oregon oak, we've never found it in the healthy um, Oregon oak forest as of the November, December was the last time I did surveys. But there were some fires in Napa Valley that damaged some Oregon oaks, and that they have been attacked. But the pattern of attack is quite different, actually, to the other two species, and I'll mention that. So this agrees with the host use in Europe. The most common are in the white oak section there. They also have Ceres and Nasoblanus, which are, one of them is very close to white oak, one's a little further. And then, especially as you get into the more eastern part of its distribution, there's more and more reports on other hosts, but we have not seen that at all yet in California. So in Europe, the northern extent is southern Scandinavia, so it's quite cold tolerant. And then throughout the rest of Europe, up into Russia, over into Turkey, it's quite common. There are reports of it in Iran. It's quite common in Israel. And then it's also common in the Atlas Mountains. The specimens in the Iberian Peninsula are almost certainly a different species. So it's possible the ones in the western part of the Atlas Mountains are more closely related to the Iberian ones, but there is genetic data from Tunisia, and they seem quite closely related to the Italian populations. So there may be a bit of a rings situation going on there. They are limited in Europe to basically attacking dead and dying limbs. They're only in the tree for 2 to 3 months, maybe a year, if it's the right time and they stay there over the winter. It rarely kills an oak tree in Europe, though there are reports now of drought and heat stress trees in Poland being attacked that were otherwise appeared healthy. That's reported just in the last year or so. And in terms of pest rating, it's assigned the lowest level, and that's really just a post-harvest rating. Because it ruins the value of the trees, but it's not very aggressive compared to others, especially platypus is an important post-harvest pest. Um, so they were also discovered in Oregon. So we did I did some genetic data. I looked at just the CO1 cytochrome oxidase. There was a fair number of sequences for this in the Fulmer barcode region on GenBank. So we've generated from Citrus Heights near Sacramento and in Napa, and they all cluster 100% with specimens on GenBank from France and Belgium. And to our surprise, the ones from Oregon are 100% match for ones that are a little more widespread, mostly in Germany, but also there's some in France in the Paris region. And then this species, I consider it a cryptic species. When this sequencing was done in Portugal, they noticed obviously that it was quite divergent. They sent the specimens to experts in Italy, and they determined morphologically that they could not be separated. So as of now, they are still included as Xyloborus monographus, but I think that they do deserve to be split off. So I guess the takeaway from that is if you're reading the Spanish and Portuguese literature, take it with a grain of salt that there's a good possibility they behave differently. So this shows where the two different invasions came from. It looks like the Oregon ones are primarily from the Rhine Valley. There's other specimens from Germany with a variety of different haplotypes. And then the ones in France, only these two have the full Fulmer region. And unfortunately, 2 out of the 3 base pairs that define this haplotype are at the ends of the sequence. So there's 2 more where the ends are missing, but appear to probably belong to this. And then the other thing that should be noted is if you do plug these lat longs into Google Earth and do searches for wineries and vineyards. They're all very close to vineyards. In fact, this area here is like the prime Belgian wine growing region. This is the Loire Valley. This is Rhone Valley. I mean, yeah, Rhone Valley, and this is the Rhine Valley. So it looks like not only are they moving out of the continent into the U.S. in the wine trade in some way, either in pallets or maybe barrel staves or something like that, they're probably moving within Europe in the same trade. So in the native range, the life history, they basically are attacking trees just as the water content is um, getting close to the point where it's no longer going to be suitable. So they normally just have one, maybe two generations. There's one paper on the biology that's quite detailed. It's in German. I've done a rough translation of it if anyone's interested. He did a lot of dissections of galleries. Basically, it's just one off. So they have, so this leads to two peaks of dispersal. They attack the trees in March and April, and then those trees are no longer, I'm sorry, these are the overwintering. They leave in March and April. They attack new trees around that time. And then those trees by June or July are no longer really very good. So they don't just climb out of their galleries and re-attack the trees. They fly away and end up in the survey traps. So they see almost always these two peaks. Though there are exceptions to that, and they seem to be geographic. So further east, like in Israel, it's actually seems to be a little closer to our situation. So we basically have one long single or multi-peak spring dispersal period. And then they just kind of trickle out for the rest of the year. I've collected them in every month. December, January, February. Sometimes we have days in January, February in Napa Valley that'll get up above 80 for 2 or 3 days in a row, in which case they do come out in pretty large numbers. They attack live trees. I've never seen them attacking dead branches, particularly here. They have multiple overlapping generations. They when I've dissected trees in the fall, they've just been full of eggs and every larval instar and pupae and adults. So um, they're just staying in the same trees after that initial spring dispersal for the most part. Obviously, some trees are going to become too dry or for whatever reason no longer suitable, and they will continue to disperse in small numbers. So in general, I've dissected 3 valley oaks, which is, as I said earlier, the most commonly attacked tree. Um, they generally, I'm kind of, something's blocking me here. So over on the right-hand side, this is a typical pattern of attack. This tree was attacked on the right side up toward the top. They'll continue to attack the tree over 3 to 5 years and keep moving down. And one thing I should note is that during that initial attack, it's not like they're just going in and they're boring in an inch or whatever and starting to reproduce. It's actually quite difficult, it appears, for them to become established. The probing galleries can be multiple feet long. The first 3 or 4 probing galleries I excavated all were dead ends. There was nothing there. The foundress female had given up, but eventually I did find very small reproductive galleries on those initial attacks. So presumably they're inoculating the tree at that point. Then the tree starts to weaken even more. And then as the infestation progresses down the tree, it becomes more and more intense. The reproductive gallery structures become larger and larger. And then when the infestation gets all the way down where all the branches are, because the fungus is a wilt fungus. It's kind of plugging the tree up. They can't really go back up branches. They just keep going down. And when they reach that area where this big white arrow is, they girdle the tree. And it can appear in some cases that the tree is actually quite healthy because the branch that was attacked is quite small, so you don't really notice it. And then some landowners have said, tree was fine a month or so ago. It was very sudden, but once we dissected the tree, it was clear that the infestation had actually been in there for years. This is another tree of one in an earlier stage. On the left, you can see where it's declining. The leaves are becoming smaller. They're also getting clustered more at the tips of the branches. So you're getting little, what the arborists call popcorns. But unfortunately, lots of different things can cause that symptom. And on the right, you can see that the vegetation is much fuller. I've been watching this infestation for 2.5 years. So this is not new. This is already starting to decline a little bit on the right, and they've already made it down into the bowl on the left side. So this tree will probably die this year or next year. Um, to identify it, the most diagnostic thing is the form of the gallery. It's fairly unique. It's described by Shadle as a trellis-like gallery structure where all these kind of uh, parallel side galleries come together. Those are the areas where the later instars and the pupae cluster. Deeper in the galleries is where the males hang out and the eggs are laid, and the larvae make their way toward the entrances as they develop. Another strange thing about these guys is they're another step more than a lot of Xyloboris in their sociality, in that they somehow manage to attack along a single plane very often, and then they link all their galleries up. So it's not just a sibling mating. They are mixing quite a bit inside the tree between different foundresses. And then because they're all on the same plane, after 2 or 3 years or more, these areas of weakness tend to cause a lot of branches to drop very suddenly. Um, their symptoms, you won't really ever see the entrance holes because they're down in the chinks of the bark. But if you peel the bark off, you'll find the entrance holes that are stained with the ambrosia fungus. They're a little over a millimeter in diameter. Um, but honestly, that's for the layperson, that's not a great diagnostic because there's a lot of other ambrosia beetles that are attacking. I mean, I can usually tell the difference, but I don't really see many other people in the field when I try to show them it that they can really pick up on it. Because, like I say, there's two natives. One makes a slightly smaller hole, another one makes a slightly larger in a different genus, and then there's another Xyloboris that makes a smaller hole. And so here in larger wood, they don't go into the heartwood in that previous slide. On a smaller branch, they will go all the way through with their galleries through the branch. In larger wood, probably in the 12 to 14 plus inch range, they're limited pretty much to the sapwood, and you can see all the staining from the wilt fungus in this tree. I'll just go quickly through this. We've tagged a whole bunch of trees. We're following them. The only place where we're seeing a lot of decline is along this trail. This trail does experience quite a bit of flooding in the spring, so that's probably a contributing factor, but we've seen a lot of mortality in drought and heat stress trees. We've confirmed that the cross vein panel trap with a high release ethanol is the best way to trap them. Um, every year, the pattern of dispersal in the spring is different, so it seems to be very dependent on temperature. So starting this year, we're tracking dispersal and maximum and minimum temperature and ambient, and we're going to be adding probes into that sapwood to track that because that's actually what's important. Um, there was some literature suggesting from Italy that they pretty much all flew at the ground. So we were wondering, can we treat the lower bowl? Because that's true with gold spotted oak borer, but it turns out they actually do disperse quite high. The only ones we caught on these towers were the second to top, 25 feet in the air. We did try just standard verbenone. It was slightly effective for a few weeks, but that was about it. So, and that was part of the same study as with the tower. So we pretty much gave up on that. So management options are basically don't move firewood, remove and chip, burn, bury. Solarization is not effective. We have lots of people want to do chemicals, but there's no proof it would be effective. So we do not recommend that. And we have a lot of people to thank. Thank you.